The sun blazed relentlessly outside, casting harsh streaks of gold through the kitchen windows and turning the air inside the house thick and heavy with heat. It was one of those oppressive summer afternoons where even time seemed to slow down, the silence pressing in like a weight on my chest. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound accompanying the soft, rhythmic thud of my knife as I sliced through ripe strawberries and cool cucumber, trying to busy my hands and distract my mind. I was making a fruit salad, something light, something cold, something to keep from thinking too much. My husband wasn't home as usual. His job had slowly become the center of his life, a demanding force that devoured his hours, his energy, and bit by bit, his presence in our home. I had grown used to the solitude, or at least I told myself I had. But there was something about today that made the emptiness echo louder than normal, like I was holding my breath, waiting for something I couldn't quite name. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Each of your shares is not only a motivation for us but also contributes to spreading value to the community. If you find this content useful, don't forget to watch the whole video, like, subscribe, and share with someone you think needs to hear this too. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Familiar, steady, and unhurried. My 21-year-old stepson stepped into the room, and the atmosphere seemed to shift with him. His presence brought a sudden, almost electric sense of life into the space, as if the stagnant air had stirred. He had always carried with him a kind of quiet confidence, an effortless charisma that filled a room without trying. Over the years, my feelings for him had deepened in a natural maternal way. I cared for him deeply, sincerely, as family. But recently, there had been a subtle undercurrent beneath our interactions, something I wasn't sure either of us knew how to name. A longer glance, quiet tension, a flicker of something unspoken. I had tried to ignore it, to brush it off as imagination. But today, with the sun glaring down and the silence weighing heavy, that fragile boundary I'd carefully kept in place suddenly felt more vulnerable than ever. Need any help? His voice broke the quiet, casual yet tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Something off-kilter, like a note in a familiar song that sounded just a little too sharp. He looked at the fruits I was chopping, then at me. His gaze lingering just a fraction longer than usual, and I felt a soft flutter of unease stir in my chest. It was subtle, but unmistakable. I forced a smile, trying to brush off the sudden discomfort, and handed him the knife. "Sure, you can start with the cantaloupe." He nodded, his movements fluid as he stepped closer to me. His presence close enough now that I could feel the heat radiating off his body, mingling with the oppressive warmth of the afternoon. He stood beside me, so near I could almost feel the shift in the air as he adjusted his stance, and began slicing the melon. At first, his hands were steady, sure of themselves, like the young man I'd always known him to be, self-assured, confident. But as the moments wore on, I noticed a subtle change. The slight tremor that had begun in his grip, almost imperceptible at first, grew more pronounced with each careful slice. It happened in the quietest of moments. As I reached for a bowl on the counter, our hands brushed briefly, and the contact sent a jolt through my body, a sudden sharpness that lingered long after. He froze, his entire frame stiffening for a fraction of a second, before he pulled back too quickly, as if startled by the touch. "Sorry," he muttered, his voice betraying a tension that hadn't been there before, a vulnerability I didn't know how to address. I tried to mask the discomfort with a light tone, brushing it off as if it were nothing. "It's fine," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could truly consider them. But inside, my mind raced, and my heart, ever so slightly, quickened. Something in the air had shifted, something fragile and almost unbearable. As we continued to work, I began to catch him stealing glances at me. Quick, furtive looks, always followed by him looking away the moment I turned in his direction. It was subtle, so easily dismissible if I hadn't been paying close attention, but it was there. The way his gaze lingered just a moment too long, the way his movements faltered ever so slightly when he thought I wasn't watching, it felt like something was unraveling just beneath the surface. The silence between us, once comfortable, now felt charged with an unfamiliar tension, a hesitation I had never sensed in him before. And no matter how much I tried to ignore it, The awareness between us grew, suffocating and impossible to deny. The room, once spacious and filled with the mundane hum of daily life, suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls had crept in around me. The air seemed to grow thick, heavy, almost suffocating with the tension that hung between us. It was the kind of silence that weighed on your chest, pressing down with an uncomfortable awareness, as if every breath taken was somehow too loud. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as I tried to break the stillness. "Looks like we're all set," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet space as I slid the completed salad onto the counter. I tried to keep my tone casual, light, anything to mask the storm of confusion and unease building inside me. Jason nodded, his face flushing a deep, almost imperceptible shade of pink, like he'd been caught in a moment he wasn't sure how to navigate. He didn't meet my eyes, instead focusing on the counter as though the vegetables I had just chopped were the most fascinating thing in the room. After an awkward pause, he muttered something about needing to make a phone call. His voice clipped, hurried, like he couldn't get away fast enough. And then, as if to escape the weight of the moment, he quickly turned and left the room. I stood there, alone now, the emptiness of the space stretching out before me. My eyes lingered on the empty doorway where he had just stood, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something that I couldn't quite put into words, yet couldn't deny. My mind replayed the brief exchange, every glance, every subtle touch, over and over. I told myself it was nothing, just a passing moment, a random flicker in the rhythm of our usual interactions. Jason was young, probably dealing with something of his own that had nothing to do with me. Maybe he was nervous, or perhaps shy in a way I hadn't noticed before. But as much as I tried to convince myself, a gnawing certainty settled deep within me. I knew better. The way his eyes darted away when he thought I wasn't looking, the way our hands had brushed just a little too close, the tremor in his voice when he spoke. It wasn't just coincidence. It wasn't just a fleeting, innocent moment. It all felt deliberate, even if he hadn't meant it to be. The silence, the tension, the air between us now seemed heavy with unspoken things neither of us knew how to address but couldn't ignore. That evening, as I sank into the couch, the hours stretching long as I waited for my husband to return, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had irrevocably shifted between Jason and me. The sensation was subtle, like a fleeting shadow that danced just beyond the edge of my vision, too faint to catch in full, but undeniably present. It hovered over every thought, every movement, tugging at me like an unresolved cord that refused to be ignored. No matter how many times I tried to brush it away, to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks, the unease settled deeper, gnawing at the back of my mind. In the days that followed, the change between us became more palpable. There was an invisible line, a quiet divide, that I could feel stretching between us, a space that neither of us dared to acknowledge. It hung in the air like a secret neither of us could name, but both of us could feel. His usual casualness had shifted into something more deliberate, more intense. Jason began to linger around the house more often, appearing in rooms where he rarely ventured before, offering help with tasks he had once shown no interest in. At first, I told myself it was harmless, just his way of filling time, or maybe he had become more conscientious. But as the days wore on, it became glaringly obvious. His presence wasn't coincidental. There was an undercurrent to his actions, something that seemed too calculated, too purposeful to be dismissed as chance. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room, the repetitive motion of sorting clothes offering a semblance of comfort in the quiet house. The soft rustle of fabric filled the room, the silence around me stretching as thick as the weight that had settled in my chest. Jason walked in without a word, his footsteps almost too quiet on the hardwood floors. He didn't speak at first, just sat on the couch, flipping through channels on the TV with an absent-minded air that didn't quite match the tension I could feel rising between us. I tried to focus on the task at hand, folding the shirts and towels with mechanical precision, but I couldn't escape the feeling that he was watching me. I felt his eyes on me, the weight of his gaze following my every movement, stealing glances whenever he thought I wasn't looking. It made my skin prickle, a strange unease crawling over me, the though I forced myself to keep my face neutral, to pretend nothing was amiss. After what felt like an eternity of silence, he spoke, his voice breaking through the quiet with a casualness that didn't match the gravity in his eyes. "You've been busy," he said, his tone light, but there was something different in the way he said it, something that pulled at the edges of my nerves, tightening them. His expression, usually so open and easy, was more guarded now, a flicker of something dark behind his gaze that unsettled me even further. I didn't meet his eyes as I replied, my voice coming out flat, maybe too flat. "Just keeping things in order," I said, my words hanging in the air between us like an attempt to hold back a tidal wave. But even as I spoke, I knew it was more than that. The tension, the distance, the way his presence seemed to fill every space between us. It was too much, too heavy to ignore. He didn't respond, and the silence stretched out longer than it should have. Finally, I looked up. His eyes locked onto mine. There was something in his expression, curiosity, want, or something deeper, that left me unsettled. Later that week, I decided to spend some time by the pool, hoping to clear my mind. I wasn't expecting company, but Jason appeared not long after, claiming he needed a break from his studies. He dropped his towel onto a chair and jumped into the water without hesitation. I stayed on my lounge chair, pretending to be engrossed in a book. But when he surfaced from the pool, water dripping from his hair and shoulders, I couldn't help but glance up. He caught me looking, and for a brief moment, neither of us looked away. "Not getting in?" he asked, his voice light but his eyes heavy with meaning. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm fine here." He swam closer to the edge, resting his arms on the side of the pool. His gaze stayed on me in a way that felt far too intimate. I felt the heat rise within me, not from the sun but from the tension between us. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his tone softer now. I shrugged, trying to deflect. "Just tired, I guess." Jason didn't push further, but the way he looked at me made it clear he wasn't buying my answer. After a while, he climbed out of the pool, grabbing his towel and drying off. As he walked past, water droplets fell onto the hot pavement. I felt my heart race in the quiet moments after he left. I sat there, replaying everything in my mind. I couldn't deny that something was happening, something I wasn't ready to talk about. And the way he looked at me, the way he lingered near me, it wasn't innocent anymore. It was deliberate. And the weight of it was impossible to ignore. It was late at night, and the house was quiet. I had gone to the kitchen for some water, hoping to clear my mind. The air felt thick, not just from the summer heat, but from the tension that had been building over the past few weeks. I didn't expect to see Jason there, shirtless and leaning against the counter as he rummaged through the fridge. "You're up late," I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed the nervousness I felt. "Couldn't sleep," he replied without looking at me. He closed the fridge and turned around, his eyes meeting mine. Something in his expression made my breath catch, a mixture of vulnerability and boldness I hadn't seen before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was loud, filled with words neither of us dared to say. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the way his eyes lingered, not on the glass in my hand, but on me. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his tone hesitant. I tilted my head, trying to play it off as nothing. "What's that?" He hesitated, then took a step closer. "Do you ever feel like you don't belong where you are?" The question caught me off guard. I searched his face, unsure of how to answer. "What do you mean?" "Yes." He spoke, his voice soft. "Like you're meant for something else. Something more. Like you're stuck in a life that doesn't really fit you." I didn't know how to respond. The honesty in his words, the way they mirrored feelings I had buried deep inside, left me shaken. Before I could think of an answer, he stepped closer again, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence. "Jason," I started, but he cut me off. "I know this is wrong," he said quickly, his voice trembling. "I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I can't stop. I've tried and I can't." I stared at him, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "We can't," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't move. Didn't look away. "I think about you all the time. I try not to, but I can't help it. You're all I see." His words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. I wanted to tell him to stop, to leave, to pretend this conversation never happened. But I couldn't. When he reached out, brushing his fingers lightly against my arm, it felt like fire. I should have pulled away. Should have told him this was impossible. Instead, I stood frozen, letting the moment stretch into something it shouldn't have been. Then it happened. His lips touched mine, tentative at first but quickly deepening. The kiss was electric, overwhelming, and entirely wrong. I pulled back abruptly, tears in my eyes. "This can't happen," I said, my voice breaking. Without waiting for his response, I turned and left the room, leaving him standing there in silence. The next morning was unbearable. The air between us was thick with everything left unsaid. I avoided looking at Jason, focusing instead on mundane tasks, hoping to regain some sense of normalcy. But every time he entered the room, my pulse quickened, and I felt the weight of his presence. At breakfast, he sat across from me, unusually quiet. My husband chattered about work, oblivious to the tension crackling between Jason and me. I nodded along, pretending to listen, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the kiss over and over. After my husband left for work, Jason lingered in the living room. I tried to avoid him, but when I walked past, he called out softly, "Can we talk?" Froze. I knew I couldn't avoid this conversation forever. Without a word, I turned and sat down on the edge of the couch, keeping as much distance as possible. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice filled with regret. "I never should have. I didn't mean to make things harder for you." I shook my head, my hands clasped tight in my lap. "Jason, what happened last night? It can't happen again. It crossed the line." "I know," he said quickly, leaning forward. "I know it's wrong. But I can't pretend I don't feel the way I do. You mean more to me than anyone else ever has." His words cut through me like a knife. I wanted to tell him to stop, to leave me alone. But the sincerity in his voice made it impossible. "This isn't fair," I said finally, my voice trembling. "Not to you, and definitely not to your father." He flinched at the mention of his father, but he didn't back down. "I can't help how I feel," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know you feel something too. Don't tell me you don't." The truth hung heavy between us. I couldn't deny it anymore. I had felt something I couldn't explain or justify. But that didn't make it right. "What we feel doesn't matter," I said firmly, though my voice wavered. "We have to let go, Jason. We can't do this to him." He looked at me with a mix of pain and determination. "I don't want to hurt him," he said. "But I can't pretend this isn't real. You're the only person who's ever made me feel this way." Before I could respond, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the moment. My husband was home early. Jason and I exchanged a panicked glance, and he quickly stood up, retreating to his room without another word. As I watched him disappear down the hallway, I felt an ache in my chest that I couldn't explain. Lines had been blurred, boundaries broken, and nothing would ever be the same again. My heart was torn between guilt, loyalty, and something I dared not name. And for the first time, I wasn't sure what I would do next. Thank you for staying with us. If you find it interesting and useful, please subscribe, like, and share so you don't miss the next video. Thanks.